I want to welcome everyone and thank you for being here this evening for this speaker series. As you know, Prairie, our mission is that we're a unique historic place that inspires curiosity and fosters learning by providing engaging and individualized experiences for everyone. And we really take that everyone part of our mission very seriously. And quite often people will say, Norman or Andrew or Brian Timberman, our board chair, how do you serve everyone? Well, maybe we can't, but it shouldn't be because we don't try. And I will tell you that Ryan Shank and what we're doing in marketing communications with our e-learning portal and with creating a digital twin of Prairie going into 2026, we're going to be able to serve a global audience in ways that we haven't been able to do before. So serving people in central Indiana is kind of a resident museum, a physical location, but we can serve people around the world in ways that we couldn't just a few years ago. So I think that's very important. And also serving everyone means that we have an opportunity to bring a lot of different topics to bear. And this particular lecture this evening, as part of the Curious Conversations, is an example of that. It's on a topic that's really at the core of Prairie, the land, the river, and the result of agriculture when man arrived on the scene and started using this. So the Curious Conversation series, speaker series, was born out of a desire to actually expand our programming for adults like yourselves and offer a much deeper dive into some of the more unique and interesting topics that's not always told at Prairie, necessarily in Prairie Town or in other ways that we do it. And so this is an opportunity through the speaker series to articulate many of those topics and activities that we don't normally do. Already this year, our speakers have shared about fur-bearing animals, so fur traders, a history of the nearby Robert settlement, that was our last one, and tonight we're exploring 19th century agriculture in the Midwest. Later this year, we're looking forward to future speakers that are going to be covering topics that include the Indiana KKK and the practice of body snatching in the 19th century. Yes, body snatching in the 19th century. So I hope that I've piqued your interest in attending those future series. You'll look at our website. Our ability to pursue this speaker series would not have been possible without a grant from the Indiana Humanities and the National Endowment for the Humanities. So I want to recognize George Hanlon, our colleague, who's the Director of Grants for the Indiana Humanities. George, if you want to stand up. There you go. See George back there? He's the man that we not only want to recognize because Indiana Humanities has been a funder of this speaker series and a funder of so many historical societies and museums across Indiana, just like every state has humanities councils that do that funding. But you may be a little aware, and I'll try to not be too political here, you may be aware of the executive orders which has tried to eliminate institutions like the Institute of Museum and Library Services, the National Endowment for the Arts, the National Endowment for the Humanities, and I could go National Science Foundation, all these different agencies trying to be eliminated. And the humanities is an example of that. I think, George, I saw a press release that said you lost $1.3 million in funding. So that means that the museums and the historical societies and others for these type of series are no longer funded. Thankfully, the Mellon Foundation did provide a $15 million grant to all of the historical agencies or historical societies, humanities groups nationwide, but that means that had to be divided. George, I don't know about how many, but probably hundreds. 56, not hundreds, but still 56. But I think you only received about $250,000 at this point of the 1.3 that's been lost. So they're still looking for funding, but that means they have paused the funding for projects like this until they can figure that out. So the impacts of things that are happening in DC is just as important on the local side of that. So if you get a chance, if you want to go up and shake George's hand and thank him for what they're doing, we were talking earlier about how can a private institution like Prairie, what can we do to help during this time? Not only our colleagues, but not fill the gap necessarily, but work with them to make sure that these type of series will continue on even when there's not the type of funding that's been available in the past couple years. So at this time, I'd like to introduce our speaker for this evening, Dr. Douglas Hurt. Dr. Hurt is a professor emeritus in the Department of History at Purdue University, where he served as department head. He also held positions of professor and director of the graduate program in agriculture and history and rural studies at Iowa State University. He's also been the past associate director of the State Historical Society of Missouri, where I knew a colleague that he worked for there, and curator of agriculture at the Ohio Historical Society, also knew a colleague that was there. Dr. Hurt is the author of 2 books, Agriculture in the Midwest, 1815 through 1900, which I'm assuming is going to be sourced somewhat from the lecture tonight, which won a major book award presented by the Midwestern History Association, and his second book, The American Agriculture, A Brief History. Tonight, Dr. Hurt will be sharing with us the history of agriculture in the 19th century Midwest. Please join me in welcoming Dr. Douglas Hurt to the podium.
Thank you very much for that nice introduction. I'm delighted to be here this evening. What a wonderful facility. It's light and airy and very comfortable. I'm very honored to be here. You talk about the agricultural history of the Midwest. It's, where you begin and where do you end. It's such a rich history and such a complicated history. It's one of incredible achievement and incredible failure. It's not just perfect, but that's pretty much the way our lives are and the way the lives of farmers are. So I want to break this down and talk about a couple of things tonight. Do you have any questions as we go along? I know there's supposed to be a question and answer session at the end. But if you have a question, just raise your hand. I'll address it as best I can. You won't mess me up in terms of what I'm going to say. We left the hotel, and my wife, Mary Ellen, said, "Do you have your notes?" I said, "I don't have any notes." And I swear to God, you could see her eyes. So she thinks I'm winging it. But I'll do the best I can. But sort of along that line, I was speaking in South Dakota once, sort of a group like this, and I like to meet people before the things get going, and I was just sort of meandering around, and there was a gentleman right there, and he had his arms crossed, and he said, "How long are you going to talk?" And I said, "Well, I don't know. I have a few things to say, and then I'll quit." And the entire evening, and I'm not sure how long I did talk, but I was very cognizant that I shouldn't go over whatever my limit was. But whenever I would walk, he never moved, but his eyes did, and he tracked me back and forth. So if you have a question, my point is just ask it. I'm probably not going to stand behind this podium where you have a microphone. I'm kind of loud and noisy, and my guess is if you can't hear me in the back, I'll do something about it. Let's see if I can operate this. Well, when you think about the Midwest, it's complicated from the very beginning because where does it begin and where does it end? And academics, people like me who like to argue and talk about superfluous stuff like boundaries and this and that, I get very worked up about this. But basically, it's sort of an amorphous area. And in a way, it depends upon political point of view and ideology and whatnot. But clearly, I think you can see it spread from Ohio to the Missouri River, mostly in the old Northwest to begin with. That western fuzzy boundary has a lot to do with rainfall. Once you hit, if you go about probably less than 100 miles into Kansas, Nebraska, and the Dakotas, the environment changes and the precipitation rates change and the grasses change, and it's not really tall grass prairie country like we're familiar with in this part of the country. So roughly, this is the area that I want us to think a little bit about tonight. So where do you begin? I mean, there's so many things that we could talk about, and we could do this again and again and again and never talk about the same thing. But one of the, when I think about generalizations that are important to me, if I want to know something about the history of the Midwest, well, we ought to know something about settlement, to be sure. We ought to know something about the origins of the Corn Belt that people still talk about at that day. And we should know something about the impact of the Civil War upon this region, which was significant. And we should probably talk about technological change, both 19th century and into the 20th century. And I'm sort of wrap up with that in the end, and I want to link technological change with migrant labor. So I got a little bit of a potpourri tonight to give us some generalizations about how we might think about agriculture in the Midwest. Well, this is a section of the country that opens up fairly rapidly after the War of 1812. In 1815, the British are gone, and the Indian nations, Native American nations, are dealing with the federal government, and we've got land cessions of people being moved out. But this is a giant area that is open. It's open for settlement. And I'm someone who, I like to see footprints in history. You can look at something and say, yeah, I understand that. This happened here and it means this and that. And I think we can see a lot of footprints in the agricultural history of the Midwest. And one has to do with culture. And that is, in 1815, and it happens pretty quickly. There's going to be a stumbling block with the Panic of 1819, and it lasts until about 1824. But farmers are pretty shrewd, and they're going to get around land purchases during this recessionary period. But you look at this map, and it's sort of schematic. Basically, what you have culturally is a very large inflow of people from Kentucky and Tennessee and the Carolinas, Virginia. They're coming across the river, the Cincinnati area, and farther down the river. And they bring their agricultural culture with them, the way they do things. I mean, people do things the way they've always done things. And why? Because that's the way you've always done things. So that's one group of people culturally comes in to the Midwest. The second is, and it's already happened a little bit in Ohio, but we get this mid-Atlantic and to an extent some New England influence coming across this northern tier area of the Midwest. And culturally, they're a little different people too. And I think maybe you can still see some of this. Today. Well, anyway, we'll take Indiana for example. We got a host of treaties with the Indians to get people relocated and take land to open it up for settlement. This is a period in which the Land Act of 1785 is still of consequence. It's the only real piece of legislation from the period of the Articles of Confederation that's carried over under the Constitution. Basically, Congress said, look, we've got all that property out there, all that land out there. What we need to do is sell it to pay for war debts and fund the federal government. What we're going to do is we'll survey it. We'll survey it into 640-acre sections. We'll sell it for $1 an acre, and we're going to make a lot of money. Well, nobody, besides a speculator, could afford that much money. By the time we get this swoop of invasion of settlers coming across the river, the Ohio, into this part of the country, the Land Act of 1820 is in effect. The government says, look, if you want to buy public domain, federal property, we'll sell you 80 acres for $1.25 an acre, and you got to pay for it when you sign the papers, and there's no credit. Nobody could afford that then. Maybe you see where I'm going with this. If you're a farmer, man, woman, and family, and you can't afford public domain, what do? You take it. You settle on it as a squatter. Many of our relatives in this part of the country, you can trace it back, are really just squatters. And the federal government had no power to kick people off. I mean, you couldn't do that. Well, anyway, these Indian treaties open up a lot of land. This is sort of I know you can't see it roughly, but just to give you a rough idea of what's happening here. Land offices, as of 1812, federal government establishes land offices. They send surveyors out, and they're marking off the public domain. So if you're a farmer and you want to buy 80 acres or 160 acres or whatever, you go to a land office, and it's surveyed, mathematically precision, and you can point to exactly what you want to buy. And you can go there, and if you paid for it, it's yours. Okay. So the hash marks are areas that are being surveyed fairly early, and it's going to spread.
Real quick question. Do I see, is it Burkeville and Crawfordsville? What are the two ones in Indiana on the south?
I've got Jeffersonville down here, and Ben Sims. This is going to be a little bit later. This is 1812, and I'm not sure when Crawfordsville came in. I used to know this, but off the top of my head, I can't. Complete ignorance on that. But you're right. There are going to be more, and this is a good point that you make, because this is something that enters the American lexicon very early. And it is that you could read in the papers that certain areas are going to be opened up. And the land offices would say, God, we're just swamped with these people. They're coming in and they want to know this and that, and they select their land. And people started talking about doing a land office business. Don't we use that term today? Good business, land office business. Okay. The cultural footprint, I think, in all of this is still apparent, or it certainly was probably as late as the mid 20th century. My guess is that some of you can relate to this. If we were taking a buggy ride in Indiana, I don't know, 1830, 1840, and we were having a nice ride in the autumn, and we saw a cornfield with shocks, I would say those farmers are Southerners. Okay? It's the culture that's how they did things they come across. If we're taking that same buggy ride and we're a little bit north and we see somebody picking corn ears and tossing them against the bang board in a wagon, I'd say, I'll bet you those people are Yankees. That's how things were done. If I saw a woman about the same time milking a cow, I'd say, I'll bet you they're Southerners. If I saw a man milking a cow, I'd say, yeah, I'll bet you they're Yankees. But we got this kind of cultural imprint because of immigration, and I think maybe you can still see some of it today. So what do these Southerners particularly bring with them? And they did what they knew how to do. The people that came across the river and settled into this Midwest, they weren't novices. They were hard-scrabbled men and women that probably came from tenant farms or farms that weren't particularly rich in soil and whatnot. And this area offers opportunity, security, land, a stake in society. You could take care of yourself. You're never self-sufficient, but the subsistence agriculture is something they could depend upon. And they knew how to raise corn, and they knew how to raise hogs. And if you can do that, you've got corn that feeds people as well as livestock, and you can put that pig in a barrel, and if you've got a corner merchant that buys stuff like this, and maybe has access to market down a river, you can make a few bucks during the course of the year. And so it's a selective participation in a market economy fairly early in this part of the country. And the important thing is here that these farmers that are taking advantage of some rudimentary pork packing. The people that wanted to slaughter hogs themselves did so because farmers said, "Oh, god awful stuff in a barrel." It wasn't sanitary. There's no consistency to it. So if you get a slaughterhouse that can control this, they like this. But the market is down the river, whether it's down the Wabash, whether it's down the White, whether it's down the Ohio, whether it's down the Illinois, whether it's down the Mississippi or the Missouri. It all comes in and it goes south. And that's going to be of consequence, not just now, but later on. So what do you do with these nasty pieces? They call them land sharks. And they're just nasty critters. You might earmark them early on, but the farmers just let them run wild. I mean, there's no penning at all. And in the autumn, you try to round them up and somehow put them in a cornfield and fatten them up a little bit. They didn't fatten very well, but had long legs that could walk to market. But often people just shot them and hunted them with a rifle. That's how they harvested their hog crop. So it's a very basic kind of agricultural economy that develops here. But those dots indicate pork packing towns along the Illinois and the Wabash. The White isn't there, but Cincinnati's that big spot. And by 1820, Cincinnati is really the sort of the hog butcher of the world before Chicago becomes that designation. And people in this part of the country, as late as 1850, were still driving hogs to Cincinnati. Generally, you could still make a profit whether you drove them yourselves, if you're a farmer, if you hired a drover, about 50 miles out. But sometimes you find people farther than this. But so there's a very basic aspect of getting that corn to market. And the way you get most of the corn to market is putting a pig. And that's where the value increases. So Cincinnati is this big hog butchering town. People talked about it. The hog slaughtering time is roughly from November to February when the temperature drops enough so that there's less damage or less potential for the meat to spoil. But Cincinnati said, "Oh God, this is a terrible time of year." You got people driving their hogs down towards the riverfront where the kill was made and the packing is done. It was just disgusting to walk through the streets. But nobody wanted not to have that economy in the city. But this is a city that becomes very industrial in the way we would understand it today. It's a disassembly line rather than an assembly line. Hogs driven into the top of the building, and then the things work down until the bottom that hog is in a barrel. So specialized doing this kind of butchery. I wanted to show you this picture because if you go to Cincinnati today, this is the waterfront, and most of those would be packing houses or involved with agriculture in some sort. Oh, right over here, right roughly in there, that's the baseball stadium today. And there's an incredible amount of waste until the German population starts to increase in Cincinnati. They took all sorts of stuff like ribs and heart and liver and that and just dumped it in the river. The catfish must have just loved this. But you get the German population in that's accustomed to different kinds of meats and sausages. Whatever goes into a sausage, you've got another opportunity there. I wanted to show you this because I'm going to put this in the back of our mind for just a moment. This is a map of 1860, and it shows the Western railroads. And it shows us a couple of things here that are of consequence. One is that you've got railroads coming in from the west into Chicago. By 1860, Chicago is really becoming an entrepot for the West. And the West is, Iowa and Wisconsin and western Illinois and And so you've got a lot of grain, a lot of hogs, a lot of cattle going into Chicago, and there may be transferred and shipped east to some other market. But Chicago is in the point of becoming of consequence. The other thing I want to call to your attention is those lines are basically running east, not west. The Mississippi is still important. If you want to get your Chicago, or if you want to get your Ohio cheese from the Western Reserve to New Orleans and to the East Coast markets or Europe or anything else, it's downriver. It's cheap. And that's going to change very quickly. But those railroads running east are not running south. And that's going to be a consequence to Midwestern farmers. Okay. So, just to...
Professor, before you move on, is hog slaughter and butchering, is there a point where it replaces corn whiskey in the economy? Is it around this time, or do we overstate the importance of distilling corn and whiskey?
Probably a little bit of the latter, but because it depends upon price. If you got a very large corn crop, the price goes down, and meat prices are probably better. If you have less corn, it's probably a higher commodity price if you've got a market for it. So I'm not really trying to give you a waffle answer, but it depends. But the important point that you make in this is also the matter of distilling. And that is, if you can put corn in a jug, you have really increased the value. And
it stays well in the barrel and a hog spoil it.
It stays better in the barrel. And you can get more corn to market either in a pig or in a jug than you really can just walk in it. So that it's kind of a complex dynamic. But farmers, farmers are not stupid. If there's a newspaper, they paid attention to prices. They knew kind of what was going on, and they could make value judgments about what was in their best interest. And so often you'll find a mix. We're not talking about specialization, really, but we're talking about entering the market as an opportunistic thing that meets our needs a little better. Okay. So we're talking about settlement, whether it's coming across Ohio and across the river into Indiana and Illinois and whatnot. In this part of the country, we would, probably 1830, 40, 50, very common in the wintertime. You go outside and you're going to smell wood smoke. And you're going to hear a thump of an axe. There's a lot of trees to clear here. And farmers did this in the wintertime when they have less of other things to do. And maybe you could clear 8 acres of trees in a winter. And an acre is a little less than a football field. So that's a considerable achievement. Now, I'm not talking about doing anything other than chopping trees down and sort of getting them in a pile so when it dries out you can burn it. Those stumps might be there for 50 or 100 years, and farmers planted and cultivated around it until you had some dynamite or some tackle and oxen to pull those stumps out. So it's a long-term process. But once you get out into these grassland prairie areas, the other problem is that, and anybody that's done any gardening or agricultural work knows around here, that soil is heavy and sticky. And the plow technology of the time was not particularly suitable for it. This is probably the most popular plow in the Midwest up till about 1850. It's called a Norse plow. It's simply a wrought iron moldboard. Maybe it has a steel share, maybe not. But given the state of metallurgy at the time, it's difficult to get that moldboard slick enough so that it's going to peel. It might still have a lot of foundry blowholes in it that suck up the dirt and the mud. And, farmers carry a paddle in their hip pocket and would peel it off as they went along. One of the technological things that is of consequence for this part of the country where you're in grasslands, of course, is John Deere's steel plow. One thing I want to tell you today is it's a lie. We've all heard that John Deere invented the steel plow. He didn't. John Deere puts a plow on the market in 1837. There are only two that I know of, and one is where Ryan used to work at the Henry Ford, and the other's at the Smithsonian. 1837. John Deere invents the steel plow. We've all learned this somewhere along the line, except that it ain't so. And it ain't so because the plow at the Smithsonian, some of the technicians took a little scraping from that moldboard, and they found that it was wrought iron. And then they took a little scraping from the edge, the share, and they found that it was steel. And John Deere had welded those two pieces so craftily and put such a polish on it that you couldn't see it. And people said, and I would have loved to have seen this or even tried it myself. People said that would cut through this heavy Midwestern prairie grass soil, and you could hear a whine. I would have loved to have heard that. And so what's the sobriquet? The singing plow, right? We've heard that. Well, so it peels and it slices through, and it really technologically changes the dynamics of how farmers broke the prairie sod in the Midwest. John Deere isn't going to buy plow steel in bulk until about 1857, and then it's very expensive and it's hard to make, so you don't have a lot of it. But anyway, that's one of the technological adaptations that farmers in this part of the country really, really welcomed. Well, all of these things contribute to the growth of the Corn Belt. There's one other thing I want to add to it, and that is, here's Moses Fowler, and some of you know about him up in Lafayette. He was from New York. They came out here about 1830, and with another investor, about 45,000 acres in White and Benton and Warren County. Now you know that if you drive to Chicago today and you look out the window, you're going to see a lot of drainage ditches. This is prairie country, and it's wet and it's soggy. Until it's drained, until the technological ability is there in the 1880s to drain this, it's not corn country, but it's wonderful grazing land for cattle. And so people like this either buy land or simply put cattle on it, open range, didn't own any land property at all, but ran cattle on it. They developed this area that contributes to this corn belt development ultimately. Here's a Grand Prairie. Maybe you can't see it. I thought I had a color picture of it, but if you drive to Chicago today, you're going to see all that those drainage ditches. But this is a pretty much a soggy, grassy area, but it is really cattle country, and it's going to be a combination then of this corn hog complex and this beef cattle raising that's going to contribute to this development of the Corn Belt. Here's a little broader picture, color picture of this area in Indiana. These early cattlemen, from about 1834 on, they bought, well, before that they would buy feeder cattle out of Missouri, and they had a lot of Texas blood in the longhorn cows, sort of nondescript cows. But from 34 on, in this part of the country, you see increasingly people that could afford purebred shorthorns are upbreeding their herds with shorthorn bulls. And the Midwestern cattle raisers at this time, the preference was shorthorns, partly because they're dual-purpose cattle. You can milk them and you can eat them. And but people also said, God, aren't they pretty? They're just, that red color is really nice. And so you see this kind of influence. Okay, so in that part of the country, you have that. One of the things that sort of coincides with driving hogs to market is driving cattle out of this Grand Prairie region to market. And Indianapolis in 1840 is one of the great cattle towns in American history. It is an assembly point for cattle west of here. Buyers, drovers would buy them up. And from about February to August, if we were going east, one of the great cattle trails in American history is basically Interstate 70. It's not just a footpath or a cow path. This could be 20 miles wide. But this is that great avenue of getting western cattle grazed first on grass, filled as much with corn as possible, and then driven to eastern markets. By eastern markets, I'm talking about swimming across the Ohio River, Pittsburgh, Baltimore, New York. It's a process, but you could make it. If you could buy a $5 or $10 feeder cattle out of Missouri or Texas, probably when it's all said and done, you could sell that cow for $35, and that's a pretty decent profit for anyone. Roughly maybe 25%. I don't know about you, but if I could invest money at a 25% rate, I'd probably do that. That's if I had any money. Okay. Let me go back to this for a second. So there are a couple of generalizations about agriculture in the Midwest. The other thing I want to talk a little bit about is the significance of the Civil War, because it has great influence here. In the spring of '61, just like now, on the Mississippi River and coming down the Missouri, there are grain barges loaded with sacks of wheat. The elevators are unloading from St. Paul all down river, getting it down to New Orleans. They're clearing out for the next crop. It's that way today. Go to St. Louis and look out, and you see these barges coming down the river. In April of '61, after it's clear that those secessionist states are not going to come back unless they're forced, a couple of things happen that make all the difference in the world for farm families in the Midwest. One is that the Navy mix Army blockade the Mississippi at Cairo. Nothing's going south. They also blockade the Missouri at Leavenworth. Nothing's going south. And communications are a little different then, right? So these grain barges are coming down in the spring of April, spring of '61. Have they always said it's natural? And all of a sudden, these barges are seeing gunboats in the river. And there are guys out there with megaphones, and they're saying, "Get off to the side." The guys on the boats are saying, "What? Get off to the side. Why? We're at war. Get off to the side." And you see these barges being tied up along the river. The question is, what do we do? The answer is, I don't know, but get off to the side. This fouls up the agricultural economy, which was really quite productive and profitable, of sending everything out of the Midwest into that New Orleans market for dissemination, God knows anywhere where you could find a market. It's going to take time for farmers to make an adjustment to those railroads. But those railroads, as I indicated, are running east, and that's of consequence. The thing that I would ask you to remember is that war is good for farmers. It really is. It's good for farmers unless the enemy is burning your barn, shooting your livestock, killing your family, or any of these other things that we associate with war. But it doesn't happen in the Midwest. And what happens in wartime to agricultural prices? They go up. It takes a little bit of time, a little bit longer than many of the agricultural editors thought, But by December of 61, you start seeing agricultural prices across the board, Indiana, Illinois, they start to really jump up. And they go up tremendously, and they don't fall until the spring of 65 when the bottom falls out of the bottom. But the Civil War is a good time for farmers in this part of the country. And one of the things the Army buys, the Army buys everything time of war, right? And one of the things they wanted were pigs in a barrel or live hogs at a slaughterhouse because the demand for meat is just incredible. In the course of the war, you got 1.5 million Northerners in uniform. I mean, that's a lot of meat and bread and everything that you can think of. So hog prices go up substantially, and they stay high. That means hog prices and everything else, it means disposable income. And that's going to have a ripple effect in a number of ways. Here's one of them. So the South secedes. Lincoln in April of 61 blockades the South, which means cotton is not going north. Cotton is not going north. Textile firms are shut down, really. The South says, that's fine. We're not going to send any cotton to the North. So it's this tit for tat. You need uniforms, you need shoes, or you need pants and coats and blankets and all sorts of things. And the textile firms convert very quickly to wool. During the course of the war, each Union soldier had, from the very beginning, there's some replacement in here, 60 pounds of wool in various whatever, shirts, pants, clothes. That's a lot of wool. Wool is selling for 20 cents a pound and sometimes a little less, depending upon the market in the Midwest. By the time the war is over, it is well over $1 a pound. And it doesn't collapse really until the summer of 65, when you've got northern cotton coming back into the textile mills, and this aspect of Midwestern agriculture collapses. So, if we were anywhere in Indiana in 60, at least at 62, 63, and 64, we go out there and you would see just a lot of sheep in farmers' pastures, because it's money in the pocket. Same with dairy, and the Holsteins aren't popular at the moment. I was trying a dairy cow just to make a point here. And here's the footprint that I was talking about. That's with us today. Go to the grocery store, buy a can of condensed milk. You're taken right back to the Civil War. Gail Borden, right before the war, figured out he could take like 70%, if not more, of the water out of milk, put it in a can, seal it up, and it'd last for, God knows, nobody knew how long. It would just last. And so he goes around, and he goes to people that would finance businesses and whatnot. He said, look, I can take 70% of the water out of milk, put it in a can, it'll last for, forever. And they said, what? You can take 70% of the water out of milk, put it in a can, it'll last forever? He said, yeah. I said, that is the dumbest idea that we have ever heard of. When you've got a good idea, come back and we'll talk financing. The war comes, he goes to the War Department, gives the same spiel. The War Department says, take all you can make, all you can manufacture. Ships, transport, it's good. Illinois has a condensed plant during the war years. And so it's another aspect to this agricultural economy. Here's something else that Midwestern farmers loved. Look at those dead horses there. The government's already paid for them. When the war begins, the government is really, the Army isn't really prepared, and we know that. And so it needs everything, and it needs draft power. And so it puts out word, and you look at the newspapers at the time, and Cincinnati is a good place, Indianapolis too. The government sends out buyers and says, look, we're going to be in Indianapolis or Cincinnati at a certain period, and we want to buy horses. And farmers think, oh, God, this is great. Draft animals on a farm would last about 10 years. and after that, they're just eating grass and hay and forage, and they're just there until they die. So the government is paying $100 a head for horses. Wow, well, you can unload your old nags, and the government didn't care at first, and the price goes up to about $125 a head, and by 1862, the government is starting to realize that these farmers have really taken advantage of a lot of these buyers. Probably 20% of the horses sold are worthless. They can't do anything with them. But also, there's a very high attrition rate in the Army for draft power, and there's an example of it. The cost of horses for draft increases substantially during the course of the war. By 63, the government is saying, look, we've been taken advantage of too often. We're going to have some paperwork. We're going to give these horses some inspection, and we're not going to pay more than $100, $125 a head. What do farmers do? They say, fine, I'm not going to sell you any horses. So what does that mean? The price goes up because the government needs those horses. What happens here is, it's kind of another little aside and footnote to history. The government contracted for skinners to come in. They'd pull the hides, cut the hooves off, and take the shin bones. So that probably in many farm homes in this part of the country in the late 19th century, people that were having nice dinners with ivory-handled utensils were actually not using ivory-handled utensils, but in fact shin bones from some of these horses. But anyway, the price goes up, and farmers capitalize on this in a number of ways. The other thing that's of consequence here, I know I see Mary Ellen looking at her watch. I don't have anybody asking me how long I'm going to talk, unless you do. I don't know. One of the improvements, technological innovations that farmers in this part of the country adapt willingly is a self-rake reaper during the war. It's called a pigeon wing reaper. Look at that. It cuts the grain. It clears the platform, and you just need somebody to come along and put those gavels in a sheaf and put them in a shock. But you've already eliminated several people from the job here. This is of consequence because, as I indicated, agricultural prices are going up, men are going into the service, and the people at home are farm women who either have to find somebody to do this work, maybe a son that's 16 or below 18, or some old guy like me, to do the work. What you find happening during the war years is that implement companies across the Midwest advertise to farm women. Sort of analogy I would make today is, we've all seen those Toyota commercials where this young lady is trying to sell us a Toyota. They're not trying to sell a Toyota. It's just some old guy like me. Toyota would love to sell a car to me, but they don't really care. They're targeting young women, right? You see in the agricultural newspapers during the war years, the implement companies are targeting farm women. Why should you buy this? Well, you got money. 2, it's going to ease your workload. It's efficient. It doesn't take anything to operate this, and you should make your life easier. You've got the money, invest in this new technology, and then, when the war's over, that's another thing. But right now, this is something of consequence. Midwestern farmers are very, I wouldn't say quick, but they're cautiously accepting technological change. And we can see this all through the 19th century and into the 20th century. Big threshing machines with horsepowers. Farmers didn't necessarily buy them themselves, but they hired itinerant crews that would go around and do your threshing for you. But they had the disposable income to do this. The other thing that you would see during the war years, and at first you pick this up in the agricultural newspapers, and they would say, did you see last week Mrs. So-and-so was riding a hay rake? Or did you see last week Mrs. So-and-so was operating a horse-drawn cultivator? This is still an age right at the beginning where you have a gender division of labor. Women at the barnyard, at dairying, eggs, butter, that kind of thing, and the men had responsibilities for field work. Well, now that's all upset, and so you find women now in the fields. By 1963, this wasn't even something people even acknowledged anymore. It was just a fact. If you saw a woman on a piece of equipment in the field, well, she was doing what she had to do. She probably paid good money for that piece of equipment, and the world had changed in many respects. Twine binders, wire binders, a little after that, which are of consequence to this part of the country, but it also shows the easy adaptation of farmers to new kinds of equipment. Farmers in the Midwest wanted to be shown that stuff worked. If it worked, they wanted to buy the cheapest possible implement that they possibly could. And if here's another footprint, is it not, of our society? What do? We buy stuff, if it breaks, we throw it away, and we buy it again, right? How many implement graveyards have we seen out behind the barn? You use it. Farmers didn't buy plows that would last 200 years. Like Europeans, you bought what was needed at the time. Late 19th century, you would start to see some steam-powered operating threshing machines in this part of the country, and it's going to change fairly rapidly by 1900. But it's a different technological age. Okay, let me wrap up here very quickly with the 21st century. By the time you get to 1900, 20s, 30s, the Corn Belt has started to extend west and has started to go north. And that's because of breeding seeds that can stand more light as you go north and cooler temperatures. The west is still going to be, that's the schematic thing, the map probably goes a little too far. It's still going to be stopped by precipitation rates until you get considerable irrigation from the Ogallala Aquifer, groundwater irrigation that's going to come a little bit later in the 20th century. But the Corn Belt is there, it's expanded north, and it is expanding west to an extent. So we're all familiar with hybrid corn. You drive down the highway in Indiana in the summertime, you see this, and it's just something we take for granted. By the 1920s, hybrid corn breeding had been pretty well worked out. By the 1930s, farmers are pretty much adopting it. The one thing I would just call to your attention is, when you look at the 1930s, here you've got new seeds that will produce an enormous amount of return at a time when prices are rock bottom. And farmers would say, well, why should I buy this stuff? You got to buy it every year. You can't just use seeds again, and it's just going to contribute to lower prices. Urbanites would say, boy, this is great. Cheaper pork, cheaper chicken, lower bread prices. And so you kind of got this tension early on in the 1930s. So it's something that's not entirely acceptable. The soybeans, we drive down the road again, and it's sort of ho-hum. We see soybeans all the time. The catch in all of this is, and it is a Midwestern innovation, and that is until, really, it's not really perfected until the 1970s, but in the early 1930s, research at the University of Illinois produces a pickup reel that will not shatter the pods. Prior to this time, farmers that raised soybeans did so for fertilizing nitrogen plowed under or for a hay crop. But to get those beans out of that pod, a reaper or a binder, it just shatters things. So you have some technological innovation at Illinois where you got fingers that kind of lift those vines up and put them on the bed behind. And once you could do this, then you've got a money crop that's of a consequence. Okay. I'm almost finished. I swear to God, I am. But since I went this far, and you're with me, most of you, I want to go here. In the Corn Belt, we see, and this becomes clear about the 1950s, a division of hog and beef cattle production and slaughter. And it has to do with the trucking industry that provides the farmers access to markets that the railroads don't. These trucks can go where railroads aren't. That's part of it. The one thing I want to mention here is that with the consolidation of the hog industry and the beef industry and the slaughterhouses that go along with it, we have a social dynamic change in Midwestern agriculture. And you have seen it, and I have seen it, and we're going to be confronting this, and for better or for worse, in a number of ways. But we're all familiar with confinement facilities. I lived in Iowa for a number of years, and you knew when farmers were spreading hog waste on their fields in the spring. Boy, it clears out your sinuses, and your property values drop, and all of that. But what happens is, with this separation of the industry, is that you need a lot of workers. And where do they come from? It's an issue that we can relate to in the news even today. So when you have consolidation and big operating hog and beef slaughtering facilities that are integrated and that require a substantial amount of labor, you get a number of Latinos coming in to the Western Plains, for example. Nebraska, Kearney, Nebraska has a big beef plants there. Sioux City, hog slaughtering plants, St. Paul, and that. And so you bring in people that, one of the reasons that these slaughterhouses and meat companies moved west is they were having labor problems in Chicago, for example. Then they had labor problems in Omaha. And so you can get away from these in part, but you need people. And so you bring people in that need a job and don't have particular skills to do anything else. And this is where this aspect of Midwestern agriculture affects communities in very fundamental ways. Close to my hometown in western Kansas, they've got a lot of beef packing facilities. Remember when we lived in Iowa, sort of the same thing. So you're a packer and you bring in 200 families to operate this new plant. 200 families, I don't know, so you got 2 kids in a family and you don't know English and you put them in school. How do you deal with that? You've got classrooms in the elementary school, there were 20, and now what, maybe you've got 40, 50, 60, what do? Don't speak English, what do you do? Where do these people live? Well, maybe it's less than desirable housing on the edge of town. You bring these people in, what do you do about trash pickup? What do you do about sewer facilities? What do you do about roads to get in? These Midwestern towns that have welcomed this kind of agricultural industry want the money, but they haven't always been able to adjust and meet the needs that it creates. Somalis particularly work in a number of the plants in the Minneapolis area. Okay. My last point, and I swear, and it is this. And it's a merger of, an interrelationship of technological change in the Midwest, particularly Indiana and Ohio at first, but we're going to see it ultimately in Michigan and some of these other places. This is a part of the country that was great for tomatoes, right? Campbell's and Libby have had a lot of dependence upon northern tomato farmers. In 1968, an agricultural migrant labor organization known as the Farm Labor Organizing Committee tried to duplicate the United Farm Workers in California, but they could never do that, partly because of ethnicity and drawing upon a different group out of Texas and not California. But they wanted to, they decided that the only way they were going to get better wages, better working conditions, and benefits was to strike the plants that processed tomatoes. And the Libby's and Campbell's said, we can't live this way. They wanted to break the union, and they saw how they could do it, and that was with technology. So this is about the time in the mid-'60s where there is a mechanical tomato harvester that's working fields in California. Now, they're not picking tomatoes that you slice and put on a sandwich. These are tomatoes that have been specially bred for machine harvesting. You go to the grocery store today, you can still see an indication of this. God, they're hard. You can probably bounce them off the floor, right? They're bred so they can handle rough handling. So what the Libby's and Campbell says to these Indiana tomato farmers and Ohio tomato farmers is, look, you need a market. Yeah, we need a market. To have a market, you need a contract. Okay, I need a contract. To get a contract with us, you have to guarantee that you're going to mechanically pick your crop. That stops the Farm Labor Organizing Committee in its tracks. So you've got a combination here of technological change and sociological, political change in an economy as well. This is a picture of northern Indiana. One of my students, her father is a big tomato farmer, and I think he contracts with, is it Red Gold? Red Gold. Yeah. And so I asked her for some pictures. These are once-over machines. So you go down the row, and to the back here, you would see some people writing, and behind there, and they're sort of sorting things out and pitching out the tomatoes that are going to cut it. But it's an expensive technological operation. I asked my student, I said, how does this work? Have you been on one of these? She said, no, she hasn't. I said, have you seen your father operate this? And she says, well, yeah, from a distance. I said, but have you actually seen how it works? And she says, no. And she doesn't want to see how it works. But she's an ag major. You know, Purdue they've had 1,000 degrees in agri-turf management, animal science, and she was one of something there. But by God, she wasn't going to raise tomatoes in northern Indiana. So what can we say? If you're going to make some generalizations about agriculture in the Midwest, rapid settlement, success and failure, farmers who settled on public lands without permission and only left when they were forced to, or when government policy changed with the Preemption Act of 1841, which said that if you're a farmer and you're on unsurveyed public land, once the surveyors come out there and run their lines, you have the first option to buy it. So there are some changes there. The Civil War, which really pumps a lot of money into this part of the country, is beneficial. And the kind of technological change that farmers are often wary of, but willing to accept if they can be shown and proven that it works and that it is affordable. Sort of like farmers today, right? Well, thank you for inviting me. I appreciate it.